We just used to like do our own thing. We just used to like that sort of thing. We just used to like do our own thing. We just used to like that sort of thing. We just used to like do our own thing. We just used to like that sort of thing. We just used to like.
Hello. Welcome. Thank you for joining us in the cottage. My name is Morgan Hargrave. I work for a group called Witness, and we're going to be joined by one other panelist presently. And I'm here with Taina Vargas Edmond from the Ella Baker Center. And our third panelist will be Malkia Cyril from the Center for Media Justice. Both of these groups doing great work in California and around the country on pushing for investment in communities and resources that are sort of chronically under-supported or outright persecuted. Witness, our focus is on how visual media is used to push for advocacy and justice. And our work is global, and we work on a range of issues, including state violence and police accountability, which is sort of the core of what we're going to be talking about here today. So today we're going to talk about policing. We're going to talk about police violence. We're going to talk, hopefully, about police accountability. And we want to talk a little bit about how we learn about and monitor these issues, how we discuss and organize around them, and sort of what the future holds for our ability to do that using our devices, social platforms, technology in general. So RightsCon is sort of a fascinating place to have these conversations, right? To talk about with activists from on a range of issues, with people who are engaged sort of on internet policy, and the decisions that go into how the internet works, and then people who build tools and work in that ecosystem as well. And to combine that sort of with the rights and activities and the needs that we see on issues like police accountability in the United States and globally. So we want to bring in that international perspective. So I want to start with an easy one, sort of, Taina. And that's sort of the rise of our ability to share and to see what's happening. I have a couple sort of random slides. I'll throw this one up. And so the point, there's sort of an underlying point here in these quotes, that is that there are certain populations and certain people who have always sort of known the score, right? And known the impact of how we police and how we prosecute and how we incarcerate in this country especially. And now there's another group of people who are learning about this and are able to see this for the first time. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your work at Ella Baker Center and here in California, especially, sort of, there's so much more media coming from different directions, right? And more voices that are able to talk about this.
Okay, sure. So hi, I'm Taina. I'm with the Ella Baker Center. And I'll first talk a little bit about the work that I do to give it some context, and then I'll talk about our perspective specifically when it comes to using technology to monitor and to curb police violence. So in my role at the Ella Baker Center, I work on our Truth and Reinvestment campaign, which is focusing on building a statewide network where we are organizing towards reinvesting funds that are currently put into law enforcement, prisons, and jails, and reinvesting it into low-income communities of color that have been hardest hit by mass criminalization and mass incarceration. And kind of just working on reframing the conversation on public safety, whereas public safety, we usually, when we think of public safety, we think the police keep us safe, the bad people go to prison and jail, but we recognize in doing this work that it's a lot more complicated than that. The safe communities are actually communities that have access to jobs, healthcare, education, etc. And it becomes a cycle where these communities that are divested from are the same communities that experience the most police violence and experience the most incarceration. So to that end, we're currently working in 8 different counties in the state of California and building justice teams in those counties there. And the justice teams will serve 2 purposes. One is a rapid response network, so they'll be available to respond when the police harass, abuse, or God forbid, kill somebody in their community. And then the second part is an organizing team. So there will be a team of organizers in each justice team that will be pushing for a local truth and reinvestment campaign. So one of the tools that we have come up with with our justice teams is called the ACL. Well, we partner with the ACLU to create the mobile justice app. Raise your hand here. Who's heard of the mobile justice app? Cool. Raise your hand who has the app downloaded on their phone. Awesome. Okay, good. So most people don't know, so I'm not preaching to the choir. So since the level of police violence has been so visible and has been such a conversation with the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of the kind of like the first policy to go place that our legislators have gone to has been police body cameras. You know, it's kind of like easy, low-hanging fruit. Police don't really mind getting the body cameras because it means that they get more money and they have control over the footage. So, and then, you know, communities can feel safer and feel like the police are being watched. But there's actually a lot of issues with the body cameras. So to that, in that regard, we worked with the ACLU to create this mobile justice app, which essentially functions as the people's body camera. So instead of the police having control over the footage, it's the people who have control over the footage. So we have a little video about the app, which I can show you, and then we can go into it some more.
Yeah.
To film an incident, and the app will start recording both audio and video. To stop recording, simply tap the screen and the video will be automatically sent to the ACLU, and a copy will be saved to your camera roll. After a recording, the report screen appears. Include as many details as you can, like names, location, and what happened. Bypass the report by simply pressing cancel, but the extra information helps the ACLU learn more about your video. The test button helps ensure that your camera is working without sending a video to the ACLU, while report is a direct link to the incident report so you can submit an interaction without recording a video. All recording and reports are sent anonymously. However, you do have the option to include your name, number, and email in settings in case your local ACLU office has any follow-up questions. Witness notifies you whenever someone nearby is recording an incident with the app. To activate, go into settings and click Broadcast My Location, then hit Witness. The green light indicates Witness is on. When an incident is being taped, you will be notified with the location of that incident. Know Your Rights. The Rights tab not only outlines your rights when stopped by law enforcement, but also gives you access to the ACLU's full library of Know Your Rights, everything from your health rights to student rights to your right to protest. Alerts. Keep up to date with current ACLU actions, campaigns, and events. Subscribe to alerts by selecting your local ACLU of California affiliate in the app settings and allowing push notifications on your phone. Download Mobile Justice California today and keep justice within reach.
Yeah, so some of the benefits of using the ACLU app versus just recording it on your own camera phone is that if your phone gets confiscated or destroyed by the police, then a copy of whatever you recorded is automatically uploaded to the ACLU server where their attorneys will review it for possible legal action. But if you do want to have a copy of the video for your own purposes, like for sharing on social media or whatever, then you do have a copy that is saved to your phone as well. Another great thing about the app is that it does tell you your rights when you're arrested, but it also tells you your rights in terms of filming the police. And they're specific to the state of California. So in California, you have the right to film police as long as the police are engaging in their, job duties. You're not like filming them at their house or something like that. And as long as you give them enough space to do, to engage in whatever it is that they're engaging in, and as long as you're not interfering with what they're doing, then you have the right to do that. Some tips for filming and using the app are, we ask the people, don't narrate when they're filming what is happening, because then if you're the one who's talking, then you can't hear what is actually happening in the interaction between the police officer and the person that they're doing whatever it is they're doing to. So Yeah, this is a tool that we're using with the justice teams, so that we can put the focus and the power back into the hands of the community members, and so that we're not putting so much of an emphasis on letting the police record the incident and letting the police be the only perspective on what happened. um,
Cool. Thank you. So, so you're talking, there are sort of dedicated, there are people who are dedicated to going out and actually actively patrolling and filming police,
Yes.
right? And so there's this sort of split, this sort of dichotomy in citizen media of being the person in the wrong place at the right time, right? Of capturing Walter Scott being shot in the back as he runs away, of Ramsey Orta capturing Eric Gardner being choked to death on the streets of Staten Island. And then you have this other sort of mode of citizen media of very purposeful watching of the police and filming back. And sort of, as you're saying, there are a set of tactics and a set of tools around that. Malgia, we were just talking about this sort of rise of citizen media, and an ability to sort of, we're starting on document, at least go what's out there. And as we're saying in these quotes, so it's not the cameras new as it's not the violence that new as the cameras, right? And it's not just the cameras, right? It's the sort of willingness and necessity that people feel to really pull out the camera and record what's going on and then share it in some way, right? So how have you seen in your work on this documentation side how things have changed in the last few years?
Well, first of all, apologies for being late. We have a big vote happening right now at the Federal Communications Commission to expand Lifeline program to bring affordable broadband to low-income people, and this being delayed. So there's a lot going on with that. So apologies for my lateness. But in terms of thinking about cameras and documentation, I mean, 10 years ago, we didn't have smartphones in everyone's pocket, right? This is something new, and the law has not really caught up to it. Our practice is just now catching up to it, thanks to brilliant people like this who are doing this kind of work. I think that one of the things that is pretty important right now is, one, people are conflating body-worn police cameras and bystander video. They're not the same. Bystander video is independent. It's kind of like investigative journalists, independent journalists, and mass, corporate media, right? They're different. And, body-worn cameras belong to the police. They belong to police departments. They are intended to help police. They're not intended to bring accountability. Bystander video is intended for accountability. It is independent. So I think that we need to make that distinction because, so many have, in fear, right? Because we are afraid. We want to reduce crime. We want to reduce police brutality, right? People say, introduce video. That's great. But all video is not equal. And I think that's, to me, one of the important things that we have to walk away with here. The second thing that I think is really important in terms of a dynamic that we should be paying attention to is the law is not standard and it's not steady. So in Texas and in other parts of this country, the right to record is being diminished, right? Is being attacked. So in California, we currently have the right to record, but that's only right now. You know what I mean? Who knows what will happen in the next 2 to 5 years? A district court judge just came out saying, actually it's not a constitutionally protected right, and we will have to fight on that now, I think probably for the next 3 to 5 years. So I think we need a comprehensive national bill that affirms the right to record of civilians to record the police, period, as a constitutional right. And that kind of leads me to the last point, which is, our constitutional protections and our civil rights protections need to be updated for the 21st century. They're outmoded. They don't correspond to all the devices at our disposal and all the ways that we can be surveilled and all the ways that we can watch each other and the police. So we need that in a comprehensive way. Those are some of the dynamics I think we need to think about as we're thinking about bystander video.
So there's a couple things in there that I want to highlight. So one is this, as you're talking about the conflation between body cam video and citizen video, for example, this is a dynamic that we've seen around the world as well. So not just in the United States, this is a global issue of obviously police violence and state violences, but also this dynamic of more video coming out, and the difficulty for bystanders to sort of set themselves apart and for their media to be found or to be trusted or to be acted upon, right? And so there is this sort of power dynamic where more and more people do have these phones, but the ability to create media that is verifiable and that is quality and clear, the ability to create video that can then be found and that reaches a wider audience than perhaps just their neighborhood, for example, and the ability to have that video go somewhere, especially in a justice sense or an evidentiary sense, those are huge obstacles for citizen documenters, sort of globally as well here in the United States. So, that's an interesting question of once you do document the video, right? Sort of where does it go? And so with what Ella Baker's doing with the ACLU app is that it does have a dedicated place. One of the things about the ACLU app is that it does sort of work on this issue of discovery, of finding this video, of getting the video to the right person. So that's something I'm really interested in talking a little bit about, and also sort of beyond that. Sort of, I have a video. Where do I go with it on the internet? And sort of what are the questions that I need to think through when I think about, do I put this on Facebook? Do I send this by chat or email to someone? I wonder what y'all have seen in your work around those issues.
Well, what we've seen is, in our experience, it's like really difficult to say what the answer might be because it would vary for different situations. So that's why we put so much emphasis on the app, where the footage will directly go to legal experts who will be able to decide like what the best course of action is to take with that video. But that's also why the app also gives you the option where you can have a copy of the video in case you have a dedicated place where you do want to send it or you do want to use it for your own evidence. But I think it's really difficult to answer that question. It depends on the situation. It depends on what the laws are in your state and everything like that. So the great thing about the ACLU app is that it's in, I think, 20-something states right now. And for all of the states that it's in, the information is updated in terms of what that state's particular laws are around recording the police, around what your rights are with that footage. So I think overall it's just really important to make sure that you're talking to somebody, an attorney or some other legal expert who knows what to do with that footage.
And there's a few reasons for that, right? So there are reasons of you don't want to sort of implicate someone. You not being a lawyer don't totally know what you have, and so you don't want to necessarily implicate someone, which is something we've seen, especially in protest scenarios, where people have captured citizen video and have said, this is clearly an abuse, but there are other things happening in that video that get broken down and used against you, perhaps. There's a second thing of implicating yourself, and not necessarily in a legal sense, but putting yourself at risk of backlash. So Ramsey Orta, who I mentioned, filmed the Eric Gardner video. He has talked about this now. So he has a number of legal troubles that in retaliation for what he's done and how he's been outspoken. And so he has said very clearly, I would take that video again in a second. I would share it again in a second. This is a very meaningful thing that I'm proud to have been a part of. I wouldn't put my name on it. Like, I might not do it, publicly and openly. And he has said that he regrets doing it in that way because of what has come back on him and how it sometimes makes him the story, right? And then the last reason that I'll just mention real quick is a strategic point. So in the Walter Scott case, where we all saw Walter Scott running and being shot in the back and having a weapon placed next to him in South Carolina, if you can remember back, that video did not come out right away. That video came out 3 days later, after a police report had already been filed that said Walter Scott reached for the officer's weapon and threatened the officer's life, and the officer fought him off heroically and did what he had to do to save his own life. That police report was on file, was out there, was written, was done, and then the video came out, right? And that was because the person who, again, just happened to be walking by, filmed that. He didn't go put it straight on Facebook. He went to local activists who got it to the family of Walter Scott, and went through that way, and they had decided to hold on to it, and wait and see what was going to happen, and wait and see what was going to come with the justice process, and then they said, well, now we have to take action, right? So those are some of the considerations that you might go through and that we've seen, and then once you do share it, there's some conversation about it, right? And there are social platforms that people. This is where Black Lives Matter is taken off. This is where these conversations are happening. I mean, there are strengths and limitations to having these conversations on social media, right? There are strengths. There are certain people who can participate and can't participate. I wonder what sort of dynamics you've seen in discussions around police violence, especially on the internet.
Well, last month, maybe 2 months ago, a group of folks from Black Lives Matter chapters in California, really Northern California, went to meet with Facebook executives about the kind of very virulent online harassment that we face. And, we went there because Facebook is here, we decided, well, we should talk to them, right? And so we went and sat down with them, and it was an interesting experience. I mean, it was clear that the individuals were interested in eliminating this level of online harassment. It was also clear that as an institution, they were not going to do that. So this is something that, when we're talking about police violence online, we have to understand, I think there's a couple of things that are important. One, let's expand our understanding of who the police are, first of all, right? Because we got the state actors, but we also have these vigilantes, which I would consider trolls, vigilantes, right? They're an extension of a vigilante arm of the police, basically, where they believe they have been deputized, by either actual organizations or by an analysis of power, that they should go out there and that they need to protect and defend white power, their city, their ideas, whatever it is, by any means necessary, right? Like this is their concept. So I think we need to expand our understanding of who the police are, because these are essentially agents of the police acting on social media to surveil you, to spy on you, and to harass you, to harass us. So that's number one. Number two, and that happens, I should say, that happens in every conversation about police violence that I've seen. Everything that we do, every march we take, every video we post, everything we do, there is this extraordinary backlash of who I consider to be agents, agents of the police, arms and extensions of the police on social media. Number two, social media companies are not doing anything about it. So there's there are various things that they would consider that they are doing about it, like putting the control of your experience in the user's hands, whatever. So it's like, yeah, you can block people, you can say, fuck you, whatever. There are things you can do as an individual, but honestly, a story just came out 2 days ago about how, low-income workers in Morocco and in different parts of the world are actually the content reviewers for Facebook, right? And and Facebook executives told us directly that one of the reasons they thought, let me see how to say this right. One of the reasons that people might not be eliminating or removing this content, this hateful content from Facebook, is because they don't understand it, right? Because they're in a international context. And I'm like this. So number one, anti-Black racism is exported all over the world. So no. And then number two, here go an article that just came out yesterday, day before, that substantiates that. They said, we quit these low-wage jobs. We get paid $1 an hour. We quit that because of the virulent anti-Black KKK content that we see online. That's why. That's the reason that they gave in the article. So not only is it bullshit, straight up, but also it's clear that anti-Black racism, first of all, is a global phenomenon and is one of the reasons why people would reject a low-wage, low-paying job to review Facebook content. So I think it's important to think about like what happens when you're on social media trying to debate these issues, trying to post some of this content, you have agents of the police attacking you. You have a corporate social media environment or host that's not going to help you. And then on top of that, you have police. You have actual police in partnership with these social media companies. So that's the point I'll end on, is to say actual police officers or law enforcement agencies are partnering with these social media platforms. They're scouring and surveilling these platforms and spying on particularly Black youth. And that's the Atlantic did a story that followed that, pretty thoroughly, because they under the idea that they're looking at drug crimes, right? They're looking for drug and gang involvement. But then it's like, if you live in a neighborhood where perhaps you got high gang activity, then you get to look at everybody who's your friend. Like, maybe I got a friend, maybe you in a gang. I'm not saying you is, though. I'm just playing with you, though. But he's not in a gang, though. I'm just playing. But say he was, for example, right? And they and then I'm your friend, then I get to be surveilled along with you, as does your mama, your cousin, your niece, and everybody that's all around you. So this is actually to some degree illegal. We don't know the legality of it because, again, the law hasn't caught up to the technology. But this is the environment that we're trying to discuss police violence online.
And so a lot of the content that we've seen, so even in the United States on the Cop Watchers content, as you're saying, there are sort of oppositional voices. So we see account issues. Your posts are reported constantly. They're flagged as inappropriate or hateful, and get taken down. Your account itself then has repercussions where you get taken down. You get put in timeout for 30 days first, and then you lose your account completely. On Facebook, for example, if you're not using your real name to avoid some of this, your account could be removed, which we've had. Some of my colleagues and some of the people we work with have had this happen to them. And then the content itself, if it is visual media, the video, it can often be run right afoul of terms of service as far as it's violent, right? Or it's got hateful rhetoric in it, or some other controversial content that you're trying to highlight and point out and bring attention to, and it gets reported and take it down, right? So that's an issue that we see even here in the United States, but especially globally, where people don't have the ability sometimes to sort of come here and go to an office with Facebook and point these issues out. So those are all sort of oppositional forces that work against against us on these technologies that have sort of allowed us to start having these conversations in the first place. You started to talk there at the end about surveillance. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that. And my question would be the extent to which the communities that are being surveilled know the kinds of tools and kinds of strategies that they're up against, both online and offline with stingrays and such.
Okay. To some degree, I think that people know. They know that they're being surveilled. We know that, right?
Right.
We know, and young people in particular, right? Like, are aware that, they have to code their language and code their interactions online. I think they're pretty aware of that. In terms of the actual tools, though, that are being used to do that surveillance, I don't think people are very aware of those, how they work. And so that affects how they code, right? How we code I don't mean code like y'all mean code. I mean how we, and I don't mean encrypt the way y'all mean encrypt either. So let me think of another word. But like how we protect, right? And hide what we are talking about and who we're talking to and all of those kinds of things. And can I just say as an aside, I think that it's interesting that the encryption debate is so lodged within this wonky, kind of, if I may say, white, techie world, when in fact young people of color have been encrypting for generations. You know what I'm saying? People of color know all about encryption and how to code, but that's a different conversation.
Shout out,
You feel me?
Color of Surveillance Conference.
Hey,
in a couple
Color of
weeks in
Surveillance.
DC.
That's right. When is it, y'all? Who knows?
It's April 8th.
April 8th.
Right.
Okay, go to it if you're in DC. But on that note, I think that so these young people and older people, people of color in general, across generations, we do know how to code, but I don't know that means we understand how to encrypt all the time, right? Technologically. And so that's a skill set I think we need to build inside of our movements and in our communities. Also, I think, people, that's part of why the name change thing on Facebook started, because folks knew that they shouldn't put their real names and whatnot. And so, and Facebook pushed back for a number of reasons. There's some good reasons and some really challenging reasons. So we know about and we can recognize the van with the Stingray tool, device on top of it. We know what it looks like. We don't know that it's called Stingray all the time, right? We don't know exactly what it's doing, but we know it's messing with our phones. We know at the protest, when all the live streaming gets shut down, that somebody has interfered with the live streaming, but we don't know how they interfered with the live streaming. You know what I mean? So we understand the conditions at work, but I don't think we understand the technology and the specifics of how it works. And that's some of the skill set that we're starting to build into our movements and our communities today.
Right. And you know those cameras up on the light poles, and you know that there's more in black and brown neighborhoods than there are elsewhere, but you don't know where that video is going or how it's being analyzed and what's coming of it.
But let's keep it real. We don't always know how TV works, right? So this is just an extension of an overall, we need some science and technology in our life, understanding of that. So let me just say that.
Somebody had to explain to me how an electric guitar works yesterday. I know. There's one other thing that we talked about that I want to highlight before we sort of bring in some more questions, and that's the right to record, and you talked about body cams and sort of the prevalence now, hundreds of millions of dollars from the Obama administration being put into body cameras, which is kind of amazing because there's not a corresponding sort of call from the police and from our local government saying, pull out your phones and film and send it to us. Here's where you send it, and here's what we're going to do with it. There's not that corresponding call, right? So as body cams come, there's more of a need for us to pull out our phones and do that, and to understand our sort of rights and responsibilities to do that. Y'all, as you were talking about, the ACLU app has a bunch of this built in, but you also have these teams going around the state. This sort of demonstration of filming the police and of your rights to do so is a huge part of that, right? Can you talk about a little bit how you're getting that message out and how people are sort of receiving that message and understanding their rights?
Sure. So all of the work that we do at EBC is grassroots organizing. So our teams are reaching out to their communities. They're spreading the word about the app. They're holding workshops on the app, and they're partnering with their local ACLU affiliates to hold, information sessions and trainings and everything like that. We're also emphasizing that our teams use the witness function on the ACLU app. So as long as they have that activated, our justice teams can be notified if anybody in their area, any community member, is filming the police, so that they can show up and, provide their rapid response resources that we have on our teams. I wanted to go back a little bit to something that you both were talking about when you were mentioning the issues that we have on social media with being surveilled and everything like that. So the Ella Baker Center is currently in the early development phases of creating a new web-based platform specifically for organizers who work around a variety of issues, but in particular police violence and mass incarceration. So we're still looking at, how security and everything will work, because that's a really big deal for us. But folks in this field have recognized for a long time, and, while social media can be used as an amazing tool to spread the word about the work that we're doing, also having that information out there makes us really easy targets for the police or for the state. So we are currently working on creating a different platform that will hopefully operate as a safe space for organizers, and we're hoping to roll that out, I think, sometime at the end of next year. So keep an eye out for that. And I wanted to go back to the conversation. Yeah, sorry, I just had a lot of thoughts while you were talking about the issues with the police body cameras as well. You mentioned with the Scott Walker case that the police already had their report before the video came out. So that's another issue that we have with the police body cameras, because the police are allowed to review the footage on their camera before they file their police report. So you have to wonder what the thinking is there. If the assumption is that the police officer is being honest about what happened, they wouldn't need to review the footage beforehand. So they're allowed to review it and change their story accordingly to whatever they can, make sense by what's shown on the body camera. And a lot of arguments in favor of the body cameras have centered around the fact that, which is true, that police departments who have the body cameras have seen tremendous drops in uses of force. They've seen drops in citizens' complaints. But it's you have to question why it is that the drops in citizens' complaints are happening in particular. Is it because the police officers are no longer engaging in any misconduct, or is it because people are too afraid to come out because they know that that incident was being recorded? And that those same police departments who have shown a reduction in use of force when they have the body cameras, a lot of them have actually shown an increase in the officers who don't have the cameras on, or they coincidentally, the camera will malfunction right before the incident happens or something like that. And there really isn't any accountability there. And there aren't laws prescribed in terms of does the public have the right to access those videos? What are the police departments going to do with them? So it seems like it's a lot of money at the federal level. At the state level, the state legislature since last year has been trying to allocate more money in the state budget for police departments to have body cameras, and almost every city in California is pushing for it now. LA just asked for $57 million, for 7,000 body cameras from tasers. So, that's why it seems like a really easy fix, if we have problems with the police engaging in misconduct, just give them a camera and we'll make sure that they're doing the things that they're supposed to be doing. But you kind of have to ask, why is it that they need a camera as like proof that they're not engaging in misconduct, instead of, us making sure that we're actually holding police officers accountable and that they're being trained in ways that they know that they're supposed to treat the public like people, like human beings, instead of, othering them and classifying them as, illegals or gang members or criminals and things like that. And they feel justified in abusing their power and carrying out that abuse. So I don't talk so much about how you make police better. I talk more about how do we empower our own community so that we don't need police in our neighborhoods? How do we, empower one another to resolve conflict in restorative and healing ways versus calling the police and have them respond with more violence or with punishment? And why do we keep going to the police when we recognize that not only in a lot of ways do they fail to keep our community safe because they arrest people, and the prison doors are revolving, people are coming in and coming back out, and crime doesn't seem to go down at all, despite the fact that we spend so much money on police and prisons. So I think this whole conversation around surveillance and technology really is grounded in the fact that the current agents that we have that are supposed to be keeping us safe are failing. And we need to be talking about, at policy levels, how do we change that? And then also, how is our technology adapting to these new models that we should be striving towards?
And that's not what we're hearing, right? What we're hearing is the first time I heard something called the YouTube effect with regards to policing the police and police accountability, I was super excited. It was like, yeah, they're talking about how citizen media is really has this promise for bringing a certain amount of accountability. But that's not what it meant. It was actually coming from the director of the FBI saying that people filming the police is keeping the police from doing their job and is endangering the police. And it is this sort of horrible negative force pushing back against what is a sort of righteous policing force. So YouTube effect was a huge disappointment once I found out what it actually meant. I have a couple other questions. I want to see if other people have questions. If y'all have questions, does anyone have a question or comment or thought? Yes, a couple. Can we start here and then right there?
But I would love to keep it to questions because you guys are awesome. How widespread do you think, I know that there have been some very scary things happening to folks who are filming, who are talking about police on Twitter. As you mentioned, there's these sort of attack squads. If you ever see a Twitter account that mentions the thin blue line, that's probably one of them. And people have gotten very scary anonymous text messages saying, I know where you live, I know where you go to school, I know that you organized this demonstration, or I know that you gave this video up. And it's unclear to me because I just hear sort of isolated reports, but how widespread do you think that is, and what could this community, especially technologists or people who could maybe figure out how that's happening, what can people do?
I think that's a good question. I don't think anybody really knows how widespread it is. What I do think, though, is that, as we think about encryption, we got to really, we hear about Apple versus the FBI just because the FBI went after Apple, but I'm interested in Twitter. You know what I mean? Like the people versus Twitter. Where's that case? You know what I mean? Like, because the reality is Twitter and its direct mentions and, sorry, not direct mentions. What's this? Message. Yeah. Like that, they could actually, provide way better encryption in its messaging apps than it does. It doesn't encrypt it at all. And there's all of these different ways that these social media platforms, including Facebook and Twitter, could integrate encryption in such a way that will protect us way better. So that's number one. Number two, all your stuff is available. I mean, like me, sometime in the last 5 years, I put my cell phone number on a press release. You know what I mean? So people can, if they want it, I mean, so let me tell you, can I tell a quick story to speak to that? So who's heard of, what's that neighborhood? Next Door. You heard of Next Door? Okay. So I was a member of Next Door because I foolishly moved to San Francisco from Oakland to live with my wife. I recently got married. Thank you very much. Yes. So I got on Next Door because I'm trying to be a good neighbor, and I want to know what's going on. And so there was this conversation after conversation about crime and violence. That's all they talk about on Next Door. And all the criminals are black, or they look black. They might not even be black, but they're described as black. And so I'm like, okay, seeing as I'm the only black person that lives in Noe Valley, I take that personally. Are you talking about me? I don't know. And so, I decided I should engage in this dialogue. Unbeknownst to me, a reporter was on Nextdoor. Nextdoor is a private app, supposedly, right? Where you're not allowed to use anything off Nextdoor in the public. But a reporter on Nextdoor wrote an article about it in the San Francisco Examiner. And that article then received over 1,000 hits in terms of like comments, all hate. They began to adjust my Wikipedia page, found my cell phone number, started calling me, threatening me. They figured out most of where I live, not my exact apartment and building, but the street that I lived on. Like, it was actually frightening. I had to have many important people contact the editors at the San Francisco Examiner. They refused to take it down because it's clickbait. It's clickbait. So I guess my point is it's easy. It's easy to do. It's easy to harass people. It's really hard to protect people. And so we actually have to have these social media companies and other kind of companies both create the platforms in such a way that make it more difficult. And then also we actually need other kinds of protections that don't currently exist.
I'll add to that. There's, especially in among cop watchers that we've worked with, not all of them have their sort of digital security house in order. And there's some very basic steps that can be taken to sort of educate and train. There's an event in Brooklyn on Sunday that I'll be at. I'm trying to drag a bunch of cop watchers to a sort of teach-in on digital security and some of these issues, because there is pervasive surveillance and there's also sort of this pervasive paranoia and question, because if you don't understand how the surveillance works, then everything you do, you're sort of wondering, am I being surveilled, and how and why and to what extent? Right, every phone call, all of this. So, there is a lot of opportunity for some really good outreach and training that reaches people who are in the neighborhoods most affected by this. People who are doing cop watching, for example, don't overlap huge with people who know how this stuff works. So there's still a lot of work to be done bridging those communities. There was another question right here. Yes.
So thanks for the panel and the subject matter that you're covering in a space like this. I think so. I really appreciate what Malkia raised about the content providers, where like there's a degree of impunity that's happening with this. My question is more for the organizers. So I'm from LA. One of the VPs of the National Lawyers Guild in LA. Worked with Patrice when Patrice was back in LA. So one of my concerns, which just doesn't have to do technology, but with our consumption through technology, is the normalization of Black genocide. Can you kind of speak to that, where it kind of becomes kind of like disaster pornography? And for me, that's concerning because I see that there's an incredible value to documentation and hopefully some degree of justice occurring within the legal system, as few and as far between those examples are. But then also kind of psychologically the impact of it, where there is this normalization of Black bodies being consumed with complete impunity.
Wow, thanks for raising that. I mean, so that's a conversation that I think is ongoing, and I can't really provide an answer to your question, but it is something that comes up often in organizing spaces. Like, where do you draw the line? Like, there is a degree to which it's important to understand the violence that is happening against Black communities and Black folks. You know, it is important to raise awareness about the fact, you know, like, look at this blatant violation of rights right here, and this, you know, police officer didn't receive an indictment or charges or anything like that. But then you're right, to a certain extent, I feel like we do become desensitized to it. We do just kind of start to accept these things as normal. So in organizing spaces, we're continuously talking about, like, how are we reframing conversations? How are we, you know, making it very clear that these types of things are not acceptable? And I think that is what has led to the dramatic popularity of the hashtag Black Lives Matter, because it's such a basic statement. But it's something that, you know, when you're watching Black death happen on camera all of the time, and you watch, you know, police and vigilantes get away with it, it becomes integral to have to say that, like, my life is valuable, the lives of my family and my community members are valuable. If you attack my body or you take my life, there should be repercussions for that. The state should be held accountable. And it's not just, you know, police brutality or, you know, when the police kill somebody, it's mass criminalization and incarceration. It starts in the schools. When we watched that young girl in South Carolina be dragged out of her desk by that police officer, you know, I'm also from LA. I don't know if you're familiar with the truancy program that happened in like late 90s, early 2000s, where I was criminalized as a youth because I came to school 20 minutes late. And there's so many police officers who are on campus. I've been handcuffed on campus for getting into an argument with my teacher over the dress code. So, you know, it becomes like a much broader conversation, and I don't think it's something that's easy to answer, but I appreciate you raising it.
Yeah, and as someone who works in visual media, in documenting and pushing for change on a lot of sort of sensitive issues, including this one, it's a really great question. It's a really great point. It's partly why I love working in Witness, because it's been around for 25 years and is incredibly thoughtful about how you use images and people's sort of identities and what's happened to them, and how you use it effectively and respectfully. Shout out Ethical Guidelines for Use of Citizen Media is a resource we just put out, especially directed at journalists and at media organizations who take this and show Walter Scott getting shot in the back 1,000 times in their like intro rolls to the news hour. We did a project, one quick story, we did a project last fall on looking at police violence in the United States and looking at a few cases where video did exist and was used in some way, and so we had a lot of choices to make. You know, we made more videos about that, and we had a lot of choices to make about what we're going to show, right? And so Walter Scott was one of the cases we looked at, partly for those issues I was talking about how the video came out and what the impact was, and in the videos we made, showing a little guidance for people and a little sort of context about the case, we didn't show Walter Scott getting shot. We didn't show Walter Scott laying face down in the grass, right? Because we had all seen that plenty. And if you really wanted to see it, you could find it really easily, right? So it just wasn't necessary to show that in any way, and it was detrimental to show that, right? And so those are the sorts of choices that we make in our advocacy and in our documentation, both to protect safety and protect dignity and sort of protect these larger issues. But not everybody makes those choices, right?
And I would just add that a couple of things. One is, it's all about context, you know what I mean? And the problem with what we have now is that we when we talk about overconsumption of Black death, right, what we're not talking about is the fact that we live in a capitalist society in which all things become products and are overconsumed, right? So that's number one. Like any content, any media content is going to suffer the same dynamics of capital that everything else, suffers. And so that's something I think as we attack this problem, because I think it is a problem, we need to attack it with the economic understanding, with understanding its economic drivers. This is clickbait. We are being sold for money. So it's not just about how many times we are sharing it, because that's the context in which I hear it being said most of the time. But really, it's about the fact that it's being sold for a profit by mass media companies. And that's where we really are dealing with this overconsumption in a real way. So that's number one. Number two, we have to figure out, and I'm so glad that you have these guidelines. I want to see them, because we have to figure out where the line is between when something is no longer evidence and is now a product. Because there was a period when it's evidence. It's evidence of a crime that has not been addressed, right? And we have to share it. We have to tell that story because it's evidence that's being suppressed. And then there's a line that gets crossed, right? Where it's no longer evidence, and now it's a product being sold for money. And so where is that line? How does it, where did we get to that? So I'm curious about that. And then finally, the internet has allowed us to bypass mass media, right? Because mass media is very much where the overconsumption is I think is a driver of this overconsumption, but the internet has allowed us to bypass this on some level. And yet sensationalism, you know what I'm saying, right? The sensationalism is still part of that overconsumption, and that the internet has not allowed us to bypass. In fact, the internet is part of that problem. So how do we deal with these questions? I think is ongoing debate. Some people, my thing is, it's up to you, right? When your limit has been reached, shut that shit off, right? Because I don't want to see my people dead every day. I don't. And then when I reach my limit, I'm done. And until then, I'm going to watch it so that I can tell the story.
Probably time for one more. Does anybody else have a question? Yeah, right here.
Thank you. This is really great and really helpful. I wonder whether you guys have made any efforts to have these tools and your campaigns replicated in different environments and internationally. The reason I ask is right now with a group of friends and activists on the ground, we're working in refugee camps in Calais and so on, where police brutality is just going unreported, and they have full immunity because not only are the refugees afraid of reporting because of anonymity issues, but also they don't know what to do and what to use or who to report it to. There's a lot of documentation happening, but it's very ad hoc. It's not useful to us when we want to include it in our legal cases. So there are, in Calais at the moment, there are police brutality cases happening and against the eviction. And the recording happening, like you say, don't follow the guidelines. What we need right now is support and guidance as to what kind of tools we can use, or whether we can find tools or tech experts that can help us create these tools, because it's mayhem and it's just going undocumented and we're not getting any accountability for what's happening on the ground. So it would be great to replicate what you guys are doing to an extent to our issue as well.
I have something to say, but right behind you there was looks like a comment.
Yeah, I thank you for the question. I'd like to echo it. I work with Gulf Center for Human Rights, which protects human rights defenders in the region. And I must say that the MENA, though I know Witness works on the MENA, I know the person working there. Still, I feel like there's very low rate of work over there, and that's not as efficient as other places. And people as well who use video to prove violations are sometimes really put in danger, and they don't have safe havens like they have in America, let's say. Even the law comes against them at some point. So I'd like to echo the question and add to it and maybe see what you have as input.
Yeah, sure. So especially from Witness, I can talk about what we're trying to do and how we sort of are thinking about it. So one thing just at the outset I want to say is that a lot of what we're trying to do here in the United States is what we're learning from elsewhere, right? So it's not just a question of exporting like what we know or what we do in the United States and exporting elsewhere, because we learn a lot from our work elsewhere and from people that we know and are doing really important work elsewhere. So that's just a first point. The second is one of the things that we are learning about that is how to get resources out a little bit more effectively and a little bit more sort of applicable to a particular situation. So like so in Brazil, for example, where police violence is a huge issue, in especially in favelas around Rio. Like one of our colleagues has done some amazing work with some of our partners, just distilling down guidance about what to do and how to do it and where to go with it once you do, into sort of graphical things, into things that are shared on WhatsApp, just little cards, almost little JPEGs. So trying to get guidance out in a whole bunch of different ways. There's pamphlets that have graffiti. But so holler at me about the French stuff. I'd love to talk more about that. I've seen some of those cases. That's a few points. That said, Witness is about 24 people, so we're doing the best we can, scattered around the world, right? But we do have other groups that we work with, and we try to sort of consolidate this into things we call the Video for Change networks, right? So which are little conglomerations of people who work on video, who work on the legal side, who work on the tech side, who work sort of are film editors or have those digital skills, and sort of coalesce into communities so people can share these tips and tactics, and so there can be different types of trainers and coordinators. That's sort of a broad overview. I'd love to talk more though.
Yeah, and I just one more thing. I would reach out to the ACLU. I know Patrice, who's one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter hashtag, went to the United Kingdom and met with activists out there, and that was one of the things that they identified, that they wanted like technology and tools to be able to film the police. So she did end up connecting them with the ACLU, and now in the UK they have an app. It's called Why Stop out there. So I would go ahead and reach out to the ACLU and see what models make sense for where you are, and figuring out what can happen.
So that's about it. I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you to both of you for joining me. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the questions.